The first time the Galactic Council encountered Walter Griggs, he was wearing blue flannel pajamas with tiny yellow moons on them and holding a chipped ceramic mug that read "World's Okayest Dad." The Council, a convocation of the most advanced civilizations across 74 star systems, had summoned Earth's representative to a diplomatic summit aboard the orbital station Amnion Theta. They were expecting a specialist, a linguist maybe, someone with medals, not a man who looked like he'd just shuffled out of a suburban kitchen after burning toast. Walter blinked at the assembly of creatures before him, some gelatinous, some crystalline, one that looked like a pile of moss with eyes. He took a sip from his mug and muttered, "Right. So this isn't the community center." Councillor Vierks, a rigid, glinting figure from the Lakari Dominion, leaned forward. "You are the designated envoy from Earth." Walter lowered his mug. "Not exactly. I was making tea when a beam of light shot through my ceiling and yanked me out of my house." "I think your teleportation system got the wrong guy." Vierks turned to the technician in the corner. "Your species identification was correct." The technician, a pale-skinned Zakari with a twitching eye, looked nervous. "Yes, confirmed. This is Walter Griggs. He signed the Earth Volunteer Registry 6 years ago." Walter's brow furrowed. "Wait, was that the form where I thought I was signing up for climate change surveys?" "Affirmative," the technician said. Walter rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Of course it is." The council chamber fell into an awkward silence. Someone coughed, or maybe it was a species that communicated through coughing. Walter wasn't sure. Councillor Vierks's metallic shoulders lifted in what might have been a sigh. "Very well, we shall proceed." Walter raised a hand. "Look, I can't even fix my garbage disposal." "What do you need me for?" Councillor Maru, a floating orb of light with a voice like a wind chime, hovered forward. "Earth has been granted temporary observer status in the Council. You are required to witness proceedings and offer insight into your species' behavior in interstellar matters." Walter looked down at his pajamas, then at Maru. "You sure about that?" "Yes." He took another sip. "All right then. Guess I'm in." What followed was 3 hours of legislative jargon from species who debated at frequencies Walter's ears could barely process. He tried to follow along, but his attention drifted to the strange gravity in the room, the way the floor pulsed slightly beneath his feet, and a suspicious panel that seemed to be blinking in Morse code. Or maybe that was his brain trying to entertain itself. After the 5th motion on interstellar mineral rights, Walter stood. "Question," he said. The room hushed. "Why does any of this matter if half your planets are dealing with starvation and the other half are building death satellites?" Councillor Vierks narrowed his eyes. "Are you suggesting we abandon procedural order?" Walter shrugged. "I'm suggesting maybe you fix the plumbing before you repaint the house." A ripple of strange sounds filled the chamber. Some of it might have been laughter. Maru floated closer. "We have never heard such bluntness. It is inefficient." Walter sat again. "You ever try to get a bunch of humans to agree on pizza toppings? Efficiency's overrated." Despite the council's initial irritation, Walter was invited back the next day, and the next. Partly because the council was mandated to host Earth's envoy for 72 galactic rotations. And partly because he had, to everyone's surprise, stopped a trade dispute between the Zarnath and the Drakh by suggesting they swap seasonal crops instead of arguing about mining rights. He'd drawn an entire solution on a napkin with a crayon borrowed from the ship's daycare. By the end of the week, Walter had been given a translator implant, a provisional badge, and an uncomfortable seat at the table. He still wore pajamas, though. Mostly because no one could figure out his size and the synthetic clothing offered by the station gave him hives, the council started to notice something strange. Walter didn't try to dominate discussions. He didn't pretend to be smarter than he was, but he listened. And he asked questions no one else did. When the Threx delegation presented a new planetary defense system, Walter asked how many maintenance workers would be required to keep it running. When the Ekarni proposed a warp tunnel through neutral space, Walter asked what would happen if the tunnel collapsed with ships inside. These weren't revolutionary insights. They were just questions no one had thought to ask. Then came the incident on Deck 12. Walter was on his way to get tea when the lights flickered and a klaxon howled through the corridor. A Garvian security officer sprinted past him, shouting something about a hull breach. He froze. Hull breach, like space hull, the officer didn't answer. Walter pressed himself against the wall as a group of engineers ran by. A panel exploded 2 meters ahead, sending smoke and sparks into the air. He ducked into a side alcove and coughed, covering his mouth with his sleeve. "All right, think," he mumbled. "Think, think, think." His eyes darted to the emergency toolkit bolted to the wall. He yanked it open. Inside were tools he didn't recognize, and one he did a coil of what looked like industrial-strength sealant tape. He grabbed it and followed the smoke. The corridor bent sharply to the left, ending at a sealed bulkhead. A faint hissing came from the edges. Air was leaking. He dropped to his knees and ran his hands along the seal. Cold, very cold. A voice crackled above him. "All personnel evacuate Deck 12. Containment breach imminent." Walter looked at the tape, then back at the seam. "This is stupid," he said and started rapping. The tape held. Barely. It slowed the leak enough for emergency systems to kick in. 10 minutes later, the breach was sealed from the other side. When the engineers arrived, they found Walter slumped against the wall, shivering and coughing, the roll of tape still in his hand. He spent 3 days in the medbay. The doctors, if that's what they were, said he'd suffered mild hypoxia and second-degree burns on his arm from a steam valve. When Vierks visited, Walter was eating a bowl of soup very slowly. "You could have died," Vierks said. Walter looked up. "Yeah, kind of figured." "Why didn't you evacuate?" He shrugged. "Didn't seem like anyone else was going to fix it." Vierks stared at him for a long moment. "You are." "Difficult to categorize." Walter poked a chunk of vegetable in his soup. "I get that a lot." The breach became a matter of public record. News of the human in pajamas who patched a hull leak with tape spread across the station. Some called it foolish. Others called it heroic. The council began to reconsider its understanding of human capabilities. But it wasn't until the peace summit between the Talari and the Vask that Walter's reputation truly solidified. The summit was a disaster from the start. The Talari ambassador accused the Vask of orbital sabotage. The Vask ambassador retaliated by tossing a plate of fruit at the Talari. Security stepped in. A translator droid exploded. Walter, who had been studying a diagram of the Talari's weather control system, stood and walked into the chaos. "Stop yelling," he said. No one listened. He picked up a pitcher of water and poured it over the Talari ambassador's head. Silence fell. "Now that I have your attention," Walter said, "I'd like to point out that both your species rely on the same ionosphere currents. If either of you detonates a satellite, you're going to fry your own atmosphere." The Talari blinked. "That is speculative." Walter turned the diagram around. "No, that's physics." The Vask ambassador narrowed his eyes. "You would risk offending both parties." Walter set the pitcher down. "If you blow each other up, you won't live long enough to be offended." An hour later, both sides agreed to a ceasefire and a joint atmospheric study. The council was stunned. Councillor Maru visited him that evening. "You are unpredictable," she said. Walter nodded from his cot. "So I've been told." "Your attire alone is a breach of decorum." He looked at his pajamas. They're comfortable." Maru paused. "We have begun to reassess humanity's potential contributions." Walter raised an eyebrow. "Because I wear pajamas and yell at people?" "Because you adapt." "Improvisation is rare among elder species. You survive through flexibility." Walter leaned back and folded his arms. "That's just life where I come from." Maru hovered closer. "The council will not underestimate you again." He yawned. "Good. Maybe next time you'll let me bring a change of clothes." She tilted slightly, a gesture he'd come to recognize as amusement. "Perhaps." As Maru floated away, Walter pulled a blanket over himself. The station hummed softly around him. Somewhere in the distance, a new crisis was probably unfolding. But for now, he slept. Pajamas and all. It started with a smell. Walter was halfway through a bowl of something purple and semi-liquid in the communal mess. He'd stopped asking what things were after the incident with the translucent noodles when a pungent, metallic tang hit his nose. Not quite rust, not quite burnt plastic. It made his stomach do a cautious backflip. A six-limbed creature 2 tables away dropped its eating utensil and convulsed. Then another slumped against the wall, its breathing ragged. Someone screamed, though Walter wasn't sure which mouth it came from. "Do not ingest the food," barked a tall, almost fungal being with branching antennae. "Contaminant detected. This zone is compromised." Walter looked at his bowl, then at the spoon halfway to his mouth. Well, close one. Sirens didn't blare so much as whined in a confused, multi-tonal wail that seemed designed by committee. Bulkhead doors began to seal. Air scrubbers kicked into overdrive. A wall panel hissed and retracted, revealing a quarantine pod shaped like a coffin with handles. Walter stood up as calmly as he could, holding the bowl away from him. "I didn't touch it, technically." The fungal being, wearing a white armband with a red triangle, pointed to him. "You were consuming meal set Delta 12, you must be screened." Walter hesitated, then nodded. "Fine. But I'm keeping the spoon." They led him to a small examination room on Subdeck 8, a place that smelled sterile in a way only advanced civilizations could engineer. 2 medical officers, one resembling a large caterpillar with surgical gloves on each segment, and the other a floating orb with retractable needles, began scanning him before he was fully seated. Internal temperature within tolerable margins. No dermal lesions. Cardiopulmonary rhythm elevated but stable. Walter raised a hand. "That's just because I walked here. Also, I panicked a little when the orb hissed." "Remain still," said the caterpillar. "We must ensure you have not absorbed trace elements of the contaminant. Your species' biochemistry is anomalously reactive." The orb buzzed. "Preliminary results indicate no contamination. However, your glucose level is elevated and your blood pressure is concerning." "That's not from the soup," Walter muttered. "That's from the council's coffee substitute." "Stuff tastes like fear and regret." The caterpillar blinked if that's what the twitch was. "You may return to non-restricted zones. Do not consume any station food until further notice." Walter stood. "Does that include the green packets in the lounge?" "Yes," the orb replied. "Especially those." He wandered back toward his quarters, the hallway unusually quiet. Lights flickered overhead in a rhythm that might have been diagnostic or just bad wiring. A pair of engineers in environmental suits scuttled past, hauling a sealed drum between them. He made a mental note to start carrying protein bars if he ever got them approved by customs. By the time he reached his room, a message waited on the console. Plain text, no signature. Report to communications deck, level 5. Priority 2. He tapped the acknowledgement and leaned against the wall for a moment, feeling the weight of it. The last time he'd been summoned with a priority tag, he'd ended up mediating a dispute over the ethics of cloning extinct livestock. This felt heavier. The communications deck wasn't loud. Exactly, it was more like standing inside a brain mid-thought. Screens pulsed with alien languages, audio filters hissed, and half the consoles were manned by species designed for entirely different gravitational norms. A technician with rotating eye stalks pointed him toward one of the observation chambers. Inside, Counselor Maru floated near a display projecting a star chart. She turned as he entered. "You are familiar with the Virelian frame?" Walter squinted at the map. "That the stretch of space near the twin suns with the weird magnetic storms?" "Yes. A mining vessel from the Syndicate Collective has gone offline. They sent a distress pulse 3 hours ago. Coordinates place them near a flux anomaly. Standard rescue protocols have failed to reach them." "Why me?" Maru's glow dimmed slightly. "You possess a statistical tendency toward improbable survival. The Council believes your presence may increase mission success." Walter blinked. You're sending me into a collapsing magnetic field on the off chance I don't die, correct? He looked at the chart again. You have ships full of trained personnel. I wear pajamas. Maru hovered closer. Precisely why you confuse the universe. The transport was a squat, angular pod with redundant shielding and a pilot who introduced himself as Frex. He was covered in iridescent scales and communicated through a synthesized vocal unit that hung from his neck like a pendant. I was instructed to follow your recommendations, human. Walter tugged on the harness. Bad idea. My recommendations usually involve snacks. Frex didn't respond, possibly because he was busy navigating through a corridor of space that looked like it was boiling in place. Lightning arced between invisible points and the stars seemed to warp and shimmer. Walter stared at the storm. That normal? No, the pod shook violently. A warning tone blared 3 rising notes followed by a growl. What does that mean? Structural stress approaching containment threshold. If breached, we will experience total decoherence. Walter pulled his limbs in tighter. Can we not do that? Frex adjusted the controls. Attempting vector shift, hold. The pod lurched, then shuddered to a stop. The stars outside stabilized. Ahead, a dull red beacon pulsed slowly. Vessel located, no active emissions, hull integrity unknown. Walter squinted. That looks torn. The mining ship had a jagged gash running along its side like something had peeled it open. No debris, no escape pods, just the beacon. Life signs. Frex adjusted a dial. 1 faint. Unknown origin. They docked manually. The airlock groaned open, revealing a corridor littered with tools and scorch marks. Walter stepped through, flashlight in one hand, the other clutching a rebreather mask. The air was thin and smelled like ozone. Anyone here? A faint tapping echoed from deeper inside. He followed it past bulkheads warped by heat, past a collapsed control station until he found a sealed chamber. The door's manual override blinked red. He knelt and pried open the panel. Wires sparked. Great! It took him 8 minutes to bypass the lock using a set of insulated pliers, a utility knife, and the metal end of a pen. The door hissed open. Inside, a small creature with translucent skin crouched in the corner, one leg bent at an unnatural angle. Its eyes widened as Walter stepped in. Hi, I'm not here to hurt you. I'm just the guy who shows up when things go wrong. The creature hissed, then slumped sideways. Walter rushed over, checking its pulse, not that he knew what normal was for this species. The skin was cold, but the chest moved shallowly. He tapped his comm. Frex, I've got someone injured. We need medevac. Field kit in rear compartment. Estimated extraction in 6 minutes. Walter found the kit, returned, and opened the injector labeled broad-spectrum stabilizer. He hesitated. All right, little buddy, if this kills you, I apologize in advance. The injection site absorbed the fluid instantly. The creature's breathing steadied. Walter leaned against the wall, heart thudding. 6 minutes later, they were airborne again, the mining ship receding behind them like a bad memory. Back on Amnion Theta, the medical team took over. Walter sat in the debriefing room with a foil packet of emergency rations and a thermal blanket draped over his shoulders. Counselor Vierks entered without preamble. You accessed a syndicate vessel without clearance. Walter didn't look up. You're welcome. You could have triggered an automated defense system, didn't see any, just a scared kid with a busted leg. Vierks paused. The council will review your actions. Walter crumpled the empty packet. Sure. But maybe next time you send someone who brings socks. Maru appeared in the doorway. The survivor is stable. Preliminary scans suggest they possess unique neural pathways adapted to electromagnetic flux. They may explain the anomaly. Walter stood. Good. Maybe they'll help you figure out what happened. Vierks turned to him. Your methods are inefficient, risk-prone, illogical. Walter walked past him. And yet, here I am. The door slid shut behind him. Somewhere in the station, a new disaster probably waited. But for the moment, Walter headed toward the one place that gave him any comfort, the mess hall. He still wasn't allowed to eat the food. but he'd heard a rumor someone had smuggled in a crate of Earth peanut butter. And after surviving an electromagnetic storm, he figured he'd earned at least one spoonful. The emergency medical wing smelled like heated plastic and lemon disinfectant. Walter lay on a diagnostic slab, staring at the ceiling's pulsing hexagonal lights while a cluster of medical drones circled him, scanning, sampling, and murmuring in tones that suggested mild disapproval. A slender bipedal medic with mottled gray skin and translucent ears adjusted a display that hovered beside him. "I keep telling you," Walter said, "my left knee always clicks. That isn't new. You were exposed to atmospheric ionization levels unsuitable for your species." "Your nervous system readings are inconsistent," the medic replied without looking at him. "That's called stress. I was in a shipwreck with a stranger who smelled like burnt batteries." The drone at his elbow emitted a low tone. "No, I don't need another blood sample," Walter said, flinching as a needle extended anyway. "Can't you just copy the last one?" The medic looked up. "That's not how biology works." Walter exhaled and looked away. It was worth a try. The examination continued for another 40 minutes. When it ended, the medic handed him a folded jumpsuit standard issue, beige with no insignia. Walter held it up. "This looks like something you give prisoners or janitors. It's flame-resistant, so are marshmallows, technically." The medic didn't respond. Walter reluctantly changed behind a privacy screen. His pajamas, now scorched and threadbare, were sealed in a container labeled Specimen, Cultural Textile. He didn't bother asking for them back. 2 hours later, Walter was ushered into a small chamber on the upper levels. It was unusually quiet. The walls shimmered with a faint blue hue, and a single table sat in the center, surrounded by 3 differently shaped chairs. He chose the one that looked least likely to collapse. Counselor Maru entered first, followed by a creature Walter hadn't seen before: tall, segmented limbs, and a face like an origami sculpture folded from glinting obsidian. It moved with a slow, deliberate rhythm, each step accompanied by a soft chime. "This is Envoy Tesh," Maru said. "They represent the Iskari conclave. They requested your presence." Walter scratched his head. "I don't even know them." "You do now," Maru said before floating back through the door. Tesh regarded Walter silently, then sat. The chair adjusted its height automatically. "My people have studied your actions aboard the lost vessel," Tesh said. "You risked your life to retrieve one survivor. That's usually how rescue missions work. Many species would not have bothered. They would have sent a drone or marked the vessel as lost." "Well, that's depressing." Tesh tilted their head. "We find your inefficiency encouraging." Walter leaned back. "I'm starting to think that's the nicest thing anyone's said to me here. We would like to understand your decision-making process, not your species. Yours." Walter folded his arms. "I didn't think about it. Someone was in danger. I tried to help. That lacks strategic evaluation. I'm not a strategy. I'm a guy with a wrench and a caffeine problem." Tesh was silent for a few seconds. "May we observe your recovery process, physically or psychologically?" "Both." Walter rubbed his temple. "You're going to watch me nap, aren't you?" "That would be ideal." He stood. "Fine, but I'm choosing the pillow." For the next 3 days, Walter was shadowed by members of the Iskari delegation. They watched him as he limped through physical therapy, which involved awkward stretches overseen by a gelatinous trainer with a whistle and no mouth. They observed as he argued with the nutrition AI over the exact definition of edible. They recorded his dreams, which he found disturbing until he realized most aliens didn't even dream the way humans did. On the 4th day, the council summoned him again. This time, the chamber was larger. Filled with more representatives, he recognized none of them. Vyerk stood in the center, arms folded. "You have caused disruption to multiple council processes. You have violated procedural boundaries. You ignored safety protocols." Walter opened his mouth, but Vyerks held up a hand. "However, You also resolved 3 critical incidents, initiated a new research partnership, and restored diplomatic contact with the conclave. Walter raised an eyebrow. So which part wins? Maru floated forward. Neither. You are not being punished, nor rewarded. You are being reassigned. Walter blinked. To what? A diplomatic liaison role, field-based. You will respond to emerging situations where conventional representatives have failed. So, you want me to go where things are broken and hope I don't make them worse? Yes. Walter considered that. Sounds about right. Vierks gestured, and a new badge was brought forward smaller than the last, with a silver edge and a symbol he didn't recognize. This grants you provisional field authority under Council Charter 721. You will report directly to the Emergency Doctrine Board. Walter took the badge, turning it over. Still doesn't come with socks, does it? No, he clipped it on anyway. Later that evening, Walter sat in the observation lounge, legs propped up on a railing, watching a distant star flare in slow pulses. Tesh approached, carrying 2 mugs of something that steamed but didn't smell like tea or coffee. I was told this is calming, they said, offering him one. Walter sipped. It was salty and thick. Tastes like warm regret. Good, it is meant to ground the soul. I think it just grounded my taste buds. Tesh remained beside him, silent for a while. Then, you do not function as expected, Walter shrugged. Neither does this drink. We might be related. I believe your species will change things. Change usually gets messy. Yes, that is often how growth begins. Walter watched the star. I'm not a diplomat, you know, I'm just trying not to mess up worse than the last guy, Tesh nodded. That is precisely why you are effective. The lounge quieted. Walter leaned back, fingers wrapped around the mug, badge heavy on his chest. Somewhere in the station, alarms would ring again. Ships would break down, delegations would argue, but for a moment he was still. A human in a borrowed jumpsuit, sipping alien broth with a creature made of folded stone. The stars blinked out their slow Morse code, and the galaxy, somehow, kept turning. He didn't need his pajamas to feel like himself, but he did miss the mug.